You're probably making one mistake that is costing you the most valuable part of your garden without even realizing it. Every time you drag old branches to the burn pile or pay someone to haul away an old stump, you're throwing away something that could have made your soil richer, your garden stronger, and your yard more beautiful for years. I used to do exactly the same thing because I thought clean meant better. Then one older neighbor looked at my pile of wood and quietly said that I was burning tomorrow's garden today. That simple sentence stayed with me. Over the years, I learned that old wood is not a problem waiting to be removed. It is a gift waiting to be used if you know what to do with it. Most people see broken limbs, rotten logs, and old tree stumps as ugly waste that takes up space. I see future flower beds, healthy vegetables, birds returning to the yard, and a place where grandchildren can still recognize the old family trees that have been standing there for decades. That change in thinking saved me money every single year and made my garden easier to care for. The best part is that none of this requires expensive equipment or special skills. If you can move a few branches and spend a little time outside, you already have everything you need to begin. In this video, I want to show you exactly how I stopped fighting against nature and started working with it instead. I will share a few old methods that were shown to me many years ago by people who never wasted good wood because they understood something many of us forgot. Little by little, you will see how an old stump can become the heart of a flower bed, how fallen branches can protect your vegetables through dry summers, and how what looks like useless wood today can slowly become rich, dark soil without costing you anything. Most people never try these simple ideas because they believe the only good garden is one where every piece of old wood disappears. I believed that too until I saw what happened. After leaving just one forgotten log in the right place and what grew around it completely changed the way I look at every tree in my yard. And that is where our story really begins. For a long time, I believed the best garden was one where every fallen branch was cleaned up before the weekend was over. I worked hard loading trailers, cutting everything into firewood, or paying to have the leftovers taken away because I thought that was what careful people did. The strange thing was that every year my soil still dried out too fast, my vegetables needed more watering, and I kept buying bags of compost, even though I had been throwing away natural material that could have done the same job. That is the mistake most people never notice. We remove the very things that nature uses to build healthy ground. An old friend showed me this many years ago while we were walking through a quiet patch of woodland. He asked me to look closely at the forest floor. There were old branches half buried in the leaves, fallen trunks covered with moss, and pieces of wood slowly breaking apart. Nobody cleaned that place, and yet everything looked alive. The soil felt soft even after several dry days. Young trees were growing from places where old trees had fallen many years before. That was the moment I understood that decay is not the end of something. It is the beginning of something else. When I came home, I decided not to remove every piece of wood from my own yard. I picked one corner where nobody walked and stacked a few thicker branches together. I covered them with leaves, grass clippings, and a little soil. It did not look impressive at first, and honestly, I wondered if I had made a mistake. Most people would have given up right there because the results are not immediate. But after a few months, I noticed something interesting. The pile stayed damp long after the rest of the garden became dry. Earthworms started appearing everywhere around it, and the soil became darker every season. That was the first real proof I needed. From that day on, I stopped asking how quickly I could get rid of old wood, and started asking where it could help the most. Very few people do this because they only see what the wood looks like today. They never stop to think about what it will become tomorrow. And before I show you the first simple method that changed my entire garden, there is one mistake almost everyone makes with old branches that actually slows the whole process down without them even realizing it. The biggest mistake I see is that people pile every branch into one huge heap and expect nature to do the rest. I understand why because I did exactly the same thing. It feels easier and it makes the yard look tidy for a while, but large piles often stay dry in the middle and the wood can sit there for years with very little change. An older man who had been growing vegetables longer than I had been alive smiled when he saw my pile and said that wood needs to become part of the garden instead of hiding from it. He picked up a few thick branches and laid them directly on the ground where I planned to make a new planting bed. Then he filled the empty spaces with smaller sticks, old twigs, dried leaves, and fresh grass clippings. After that, we covered everything with a layer of soil and a little finished compost. It looked so simple that I almost laughed because I expected some complicated trick. He told me to leave it alone and let time do the work that machines cannot. That first season, the bed settled only a little, and I wondered if anything was happening underneath. Then summer arrived with several hot, dry weeks, and something surprised me. While many parts of my garden needed watering every couple of days, that new bed stayed cool and slightly moist when I pushed my hand into the soil. The buried wood was quietly holding water like a sponge and releasing it little by little back into the ground. I was carrying fewer watering cans, and my vegetables stayed healthy even during the hottest afternoons. That was when I realized why so many old gardeners never rushed to remove every fallen branch after a storm. They understood that wood could keep working long after the tree itself had stopped growing. Another thing I noticed was that weeds were easier to control because the soil stayed covered and loose instead of becoming hard and cracked. Very few people try this because they expect results in a week. Nature almost never works that way. It rewards patience instead of speed. Every season, the bed became richer and easier to plant. I spent less money on soil and mulch because the garden was slowly making those things on its own. But there was one part of the yard that still bothered me every time I looked at it. An old stump stood there like a reminder of a tree that had been a part of our family for many years. I almost dug it out more than once until I discovered a forgotten method that turned that stump into one of the most beautiful places in the entire garden. For years, that old stump stood right in the middle of my yard, and every spring I told myself this would finally be the year I would dig it out. I even borrowed heavy tools once, and after an hour of hard work, I had barely moved it. My back hurt, my hands were sore, and the stump was still sitting there, as if it had no intention of leaving. That was when I remembered something an elderly gardener told me many years before. He said that sometimes the smartest way to remove a problem is to stop treating it like one. Instead of fighting that stump, I decided to give it a new purpose. I cleaned away the loose bark and any soft, rotten pieces that came away easily with my hands. I left the solid wood exactly where it was. Around the stump, I placed small branches, broken twigs, dry leaves, and a little grass clippings. Then I covered everything with good garden soil until it blended naturally into the surrounding ground. The stump itself became the center of a new garden bed instead of an obstacle. During the first season, I planted simple flowers around it, because their roots are gentle and they settled quickly. The change surprised everyone who visited. People stopped asking when I was going to remove the stump because they barely noticed it anymore. They only saw the flowers and the healthy green plants growing around it. The following year, I added herbs and a few shade-loving vegetables nearby, and they did even better than I expected. The old wood underneath was slowly holding moisture and feeding the tiny living creatures that make healthy soil possible. I spent less time watering, and the ground stayed soft even after several warm days. Most people never try this because they think an old stump has to disappear before a garden can look beautiful. I used to think the same way. Now I see those old stumps as part of the family's story. Maybe your children climbed that tree. Maybe your parents planted it many years ago. Keeping a small part of it in the garden feels different than simply grinding it into dust. It becomes a quiet reminder instead of forgotten waste. There is another small trick that very few people use with old branches after pruning fruit trees, and it costs nothing at all. It helped me grow healthier soil without buying bags of mulch every season. And once I started doing it, I never looked at a pile of small branches the same way again. One habit completely changed the way I looked at every small branch that came from pruning fruit trees and shrubs. Before that, I would gather them into piles and either burn them or haul them away because they looked untidy. Then someone much older than me said that the smallest branches are often the easiest to turn into something useful. Instead of throwing them out, I cut them into short pieces with simple hand pruners. It was quiet work that I could do without rushing and without any expensive machine. Those little pieces became my natural mulch. I spread them around fruit trees, berry bushes, and vegetable beds in a layer that was thick enough to cover the soil but not piled against the stems. At first, it did not seem like much had changed, but after the first heavy rain, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. The bare soil was no longer washing away and forming hard crusts. The water soaked in slowly and stayed where the plants actually needed it. A few weeks later, I realized I was pulling far fewer weeds because many of the tiny weed seeds never received enough sunlight to grow. That meant less bending, less digging, and more time simply enjoying the garden. Another thing happened that I did not expect. Every season, those little wood chips slowly became darker and softer until they almost disappeared into the soil. I did not have to remove them because nature quietly recycled them for me. Then I added another old habit that many people have forgotten. Every autumn, instead of collecting every fallen leaf into bags, I spread the leaves over the wood mulch. The leaves protected the ground through winter, and by spring, much of that layer had already started breaking down. It cost nothing, and yet it worked better than many products sold at the garden center. Most people make one small mistake here. They leave the soil completely bare because they think a clean garden is always a healthy garden. Bare soil dries faster, becomes harder, and asks for more work all season long. Covered soil stays cooler, keeps moisture longer, and slowly feeds itself. I cannot honestly promise that every plant will suddenly grow twice as big because every garden is different. What I can say is that my garden became easier to care for every single year because I finally stopped working against nature. There was still one lesson left for me to learn, though. It had nothing to do with vegetables or flowers. It had everything to do with what my grandchildren saw when they walked through the garden beside me. And that lesson became the most valuable one of all. The older I get, the more I realize that a garden is never only about growing vegetables or flowers. It quietly tells the story of the people who cared for that piece of land before us, and the people who will walk through it after we are gone. I began to notice this every time my grandchildren came to visit. They were never interested in the expensive things I bought for the garden. They always asked about the old tree stump covered with flowers or the path lined with weathered branches that slowly blended into the soil. They wanted to know why birds gathered near one corner of the yard and why butterflies seemed to return every summer. That gave me the chance to explain something very simple. I told them that nothing in nature is wasted if we are patient enough to see its next purpose. A fallen branch becomes shelter for tiny living creatures. Those tiny creatures help create healthy soil. Healthy soil grows stronger plants, and stronger plants feed both people and wildlife. It is a quiet circle that keeps going without asking for much from us except a little understanding. Most people never notice these small changes because they expect one big result all at once. I almost missed them myself. One spring, I realized there were more songbirds building nests nearby than I remembered from previous years. The garden felt calmer and more alive, and more. Bees visited the flowers for longer periods, and I found rich, dark soil under places where only dry wood had rested a few years before. None of this happened overnight. It happened because I stopped trying to control every corner of the yard and started allowing nature to help me. Another thing surprised me even more. I was spending less money every season. I bought fewer bags of mulch, fewer soil conditioners, and watered less often during dry weather. The old branches and stumps I once considered useless were quietly doing those jobs for free. That is one reason I always encourage people to begin with just one small area instead of changing everything at once. Build one bed around an old log. Leave one stump where it can become part of the landscape. Cover one section with natural wood mulch, and simply watch what happens over the next year. Small changes are easier to understand because you can see the difference with your own eyes. There is one final thought I want to share because it completely changed the way I look at my garden every single morning, and it may change the way you look at yours as well. When I walk through my garden now, I no longer see old branches as rubbish or old stumps as unfinished work. I see the beginning of the next season and another chance to make the land a little healthier than it was before. That simple change in thinking has given me more than better vegetables and brighter flowers. It has given me peace because I no longer feel that I have to fight nature every weekend. I work with it instead of against it. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this. Before you throw away an old branch or spend money removing a stump, ask yourself one simple question. Could this become part of my next garden instead? Very often the answer is yes. Start with one small project. Build a planting bed over a few old logs. Cover the ground with trimmed branches instead of leaving the soil bare. Turn one forgotten stump into a place filled with flowers, herbs, or plants that your family will enjoy for years. Do not worry about making everything perfect, because gardens have never been perfect. They grow a little at a time just like we do. The wonderful part is that every season the work becomes easier because the soil slowly improves on its own. You spend less money buying materials. You carry fewer watering cans during the hottest weeks. You begin to notice more birds, more butterflies, and more life returning to your yard. Those are quiet rewards that cannot be bought in a store. I truly believe the best gardens are not the ones that look new. They are the ones that carry memories while still making room for something new to grow. That is why I never rush to erase every sign of the past anymore. Sometimes an old stump reminds me of the tree my family once gathered beneath. Sometimes a weathered log becomes the richest bed in the whole garden. Every piece has another purpose if we are willing to see it. I hope the next time you clean your yard, you will pause before throwing those old branches away, because they may become the beginning of the healthiest and most beautiful part of your garden. Thank you for spending this time with me, and if you decide to try even one of these forgotten methods, I think you will discover that nature has been offering simple answers all along. And in the next video, I want to show you another old gardening habit that almost disappeared but still helps people grow more with less work than most modern methods ever could.